Hey everyone, and welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving into one of the most intense, dramatic stories in U.S. history, how the nation broke apart and forcefully stitched itself back together. This is a massive, defining chapter for the country, so we're going to look closely at the underlying forces that literally tore the United States in two.
Here is our roadmap for today. 1. Two nations in one. 2. The era of compromise. 3. The point of no return. 4. Secession and early war. 5. Turning points and emancipation. And 6. Union victory and legacy. Let's get right into it.
Section 1. Two nations in one. So long before any actual shots were fired, the United States was basically operating as two entirely different economic worlds just slapped onto the same map. In the North, an industrial transformation was underway. Factories were booming, cities were growing, and the economy was increasingly defined by free soil, meaning land work by free labor, not enslaved people. Conversely, down in the antebellum, or pre-war South, agriculture completely dominated. Cotton was king, and that entire economic engine was completely reliant on the horrific institution of slavery. You know, these weren't just minor regional differences. These were fundamentally opposed ways of life that would end up shaping everything to come.
Section 2. The Era of Compromise. As the nation rapidly expanded westward in the first half of the 19th century, this huge economic and moral division forced a series of intense political showdowns, because every time we added a new piece of territory, the burning question always came up: is this going to be free or is it going to be slave? This sparked decades of escalating crises. In 1820, the Missouri Compromise drew a literal geographical line across the map, forbidding slavery to the north. But, well, that didn't hold. Moving forward to the 1854 Kansas-Nebraska Act and the 1857 Dred Scott decision, where the Supreme Court shockingly ruled that enslaved people couldn't even sue in federal court. With each event, the tension and sectional rivalry just ratcheted up further and further.
Our historical source puts it perfectly, stating, "The difficult process of reaching a compromise on slavery in 1850 exposed the sectional fault lines in the United States. These political acts only temporarily papered over the cracks of a deeply divided nation. For instance, the Compromise of 1850 included the highly controversial Fugitive Slave Act, which actually made it a federal crime not to help capture freedom seekers. This completely infuriated Northerners and exposed those massive fault lines, all while Southerners felt their whole economic system was just constantly under attack." Okay, let's pause for a second and ask, why exactly did the compromises fail to prevent war? Think about it. The immediate reasoning here is that these laws only really addressed the geography of slavery, where it could or couldn't go. They completely failed to resolve the growing moral critique of slavery in the North, and they just couldn't untangle the South's absolute economic reliance on it. You just can't compromise on a fundamental moral and economic absolute forever.
Section 3. The Point of No Return. Now, as good historians, we always want to separate a claim from hard evidence. So here is a major historical claim regarding the catalyst of the fracture. The election of Abraham Lincoln to the presidency in 1860 proved to be a watershed event. It was the absolute turning point that culminated all those increasing tensions between the pro-slavery South and the anti-slavery North. And the historical evidence absolutely backs this up. 7 deep South states actually seceded, meaning they literally left the Union before Lincoln even took the oath of office. They formed the Confederate States of America. And as our sources note, this new confederacy was dedicated specifically to maintaining racial slavery and white supremacy. Politicians scrambled with last-minute compromises, like the Crittenden proposal, but honestly, they went absolutely nowhere. The door on compromise had firmly shut.
Section 4. Secession and Early War.
The decades of escalating tension finally exploded into outright armed conflict. The time for compromise had come to an end. With the Confederates' attack on the federal garrison at Fort Sumter in South Carolina, the powder keg was ignited. The Civil War had officially begun, pitching American against American in a fight for the future of the continent.
Section 5. Turning Points and Emancipation.
Both sides kind of went into this thinking it would be a quick fight. They were so wrong. The early years of the conflict were a brutal, grinding struggle. But then we hit 1863. And that year brought massive, decisive events that completely shifted the trajectory of the nation and the war itself. Militarily, the Union secured control of the Mississippi River through the Vicksburg Campaign, effectively cutting the Confederacy in half. Then, General Robert E. Lee's major invasion of the North was stopped in its tracks at Gettysburg,
But arguably most importantly, President Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation. This fundamentally transformed the struggle from a war just for reunification into a war for abolition.
To see just how big of a deal this was, look at this exact quote from our source text regarding the proclamation. It says, "It made freedom for African Americans a cause of the Union." This is a monumental turning point. It tied the moral fight against slavery directly to the preservation of the Union itself. It also ensured that European powers who had already outlawed slavery wouldn't step in to help the Confederacy, a real game changer.
Time for our second pause check. Why did the purpose of the war change in 1863? Well, the immediate reasoning is that embracing emancipation did two huge things. It made freedom for African Americans a core, undeniable Union cause, which gave the North the moral high ground, and it actively weakened the Confederacy by stripping away the enslaved labor force they relied on to sustain their entire war effort.
Section 6. Union Victory and Legacy.
With a profound new purpose and shifting military momentum, the Union pressed its total advantage. The steps to the end came really rapidly. Step 1. General Sherman led his devastating march to the sea through Georgia, basically destroying infrastructure and Southern resources, making it impossible for them to keep fighting. Step 2. Cut off and heavily outnumbered, Confederate General Lee finally surrendered to Union General Ulysses S. Grant at Appomattox Courthouse in April 1865. The war was effectively closed. But Step 3. Just as the nation was violently restored, tragedy struck. President Lincoln was murdered, launching the country into the incredibly difficult and turbulent era of Reconstruction. Okay, to quickly recap our explainer today, we've traced how completely different regional economies and the deeply entrenched institution of slavery broke the political compromises of the 1820s and 50s. We saw how the 1860 election triggered Southern secession, sparking a civil war at Fort Sumter that only ended once the Union fully committed to emancipation in 1863 and secured absolute military victory by 1865.
As we wrap up this journey through one of the darkest but definitely most transformative periods in U.S. history, I want to leave you with a crucial transfer question to think about. How does the legacy of these deep, historical, sectional divides continue to influence American society today? The war might have ended in 1865, but the struggle over equality and unity is a story we are still writing right now. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and I'll see you all next time.